In the blink of an eye, 3 years passed. During those 3 years, except for the times when Liu Qingge helped him clear his meridians of the toxin, or Mo Qingfan made medicine for him, Shen Qingqiu assigned some disciples to supervise the training on Qingjing Peak and spent most of his time roaming around outside. In his last life, he spent most of his time at home playing video games and reading novels. When he was reborn in this place, all of these computer-related entertainments were gone. Thus, his interest in tourism was ignited. His days were carefree until he suddenly received a message talisman from Ye Qingyuan, summoning him back to Changqiu Mountain. He had been gone such a long time that even his shadow couldn't be seen. So, this time, when he returned to the sect, the Qingjing Peak disciples gathered in front of the sect to welcome their master back. Seeing Shen Qingqiu slowly climbing up, they all cheered and rushed to surround him. Head disciple Mingfang was already a tall young man. Although he wasn't handsome, at least he didn't look like a sharp-faced monkey with a petty cannon fodder character's face. Ning Yingying had grown up to become a lovely young maiden with a graceful figure. She had also picked up her own immortal sword from the peak. When she saw Shen Qingqiu, she rushed over and hugged his arm as they walked up. Although the sweet little girl liked to put her arms around him, Shen Qingqiu couldn't bear it since Ning Yingying's body had developed nicely. She was no longer a cute little lowly. Her chest occasionally touched him by accident, making Shen Qingqiu's expressionless face break out in cold sweat. "This is Luo Binghe's wife. I wouldn't dare." Ning Yingying complained like a spoilt child. "Shizun, you're always away from Qingjing Peak. Your disciples will miss you so much." Shen Qingqiu said indulgently. "Your teacher also missed you." "Wait, this is not right. You should be thinking of Luo Binghe, not missing a scum villain." Were the original Shen Qingqiu and Ning Yingying this close? It seemed like Ning Yingying grew up to be a sensible girl. The original Shen Qingqiu probably drooled over her in a one-sided way. And you, as one of Luo Binghe's wives, shouldn't you be broken-hearted? Suffering 5 years of sleepless nights, growing thin from barely being able to choke down food in your grief? How come, contrary to expectations, you've actually grown up plump and healthy? The disciples swarmed around Shen Qingqiu as he made his way to Qingding Peak. There, Yue Qingyuan was waiting outside the hall to welcome him back. The two fellow brothers entered the hall hand in hand. Inside Qingding Hall, the Peak Lords had already taken their seats, while behind them were 1 or 2 of their most direct disciples. Liu Qingge was the only exception. That was because, traditionally, training at Baizhan Peak was like setting a herd of sheep loose in a pasture free and unrestrained. Every one of them were allowed to practice their skills as they pleased. Apart from occasionally beating up a few disciples, the Peak Lord didn't teach anything until a disciple could beat him. Then, the position of Peak Lord could be handed over to that disciple. So, of course, he had no direct disciples. Shen Qingqiu greeted the others, then sat down on the Qingjing Peak seat, with Mingfan and Ning Yingying standing behind him. Opposite him were Qi Yingqi and Liu Mingyan from Xianshu Peak. He didn't know how, but a thought popped up in Shen Qingqiu's brain. If Luo Binghe was still here, he would be the only one standing behind my chair. Oh my god, stop! Wow, please don't keep popping out to remind me of your existence, Protagonist! Brackets. Waves bye-bye. Yue Qingyuan was the first to speak. You are all summoned to return to the sect because of an urgent problem. Do any of you know Qinglan City? Shang Qinghua said. Qinglan City. I've heard of it. There's a city in the Central Plains that's located at the place where 2 major rivers, the Luo and the Han rivers, meet. There's a lot of trade going on there, and the city is quite prosperous. Yue Qingyuan nodded. Yes, people trade at Qinglan City. It's always been a center of trade, but 2 months ago, Qinglan City closed its gates. After a pause, he added, Not only are the city gates closed, no one is allowed to go in or out, and messages cannot be delivered either. A well-established trading center suddenly closed itself off from the outside. There was definitely something very wrong. Shen Qingqiu lifted his teacup and blew on the surface of the tea and said, Qinglan City is closest to Zhaohua Temple. They have a lot of dealings with each other. If something happened, the masters of the temple should be aware of any anomalies. Yue Qingyuan said, Yes, 20 days ago, Qinglan City merchant escaped from the city by waterway and went to Zhaohua Temple for help. He used the word quote-unquote escape, and it seemed that the situation was very serious. Everyone listened solemnly. Yue Qingyuan continued, That merchant was the owner of Qinglan City's top weapon shop. Every year he went to Zhaohua Temple to light candles and burn incense so many of the monks knew him. When he arrived at Zhaohua Temple, he was all wrapped up in black cloth, with only half of his face exposed. He collapsed at the steps of the temple. While he kept repeating that there was a terrible plague in the city, the monks immediately carried him to the hall and reported to the elders. However, by the time the elders came out, it was too late. Dead? Shen Qingqiu thought. Yue Qingyuan said slowly, That merchant had turned into a skeleton. Shen Qingqiu was terrified. He just said that the man was tired when he arrived at the temple doorway. How did he suddenly turn into a skeleton? Shen Qingqiu then said, You just said that the merchant's body was wrapped in black cloth, from head to toe? Yue Qingyuan said, Exactly. During that time, the monks tried to help him remove the black cloth, but he cried out in pain, so they dared not to pull it off by force. Listening to these words, it might have been like tearing his skin off, Shen Qingqiu thought. Yue Qingyuan went on, The abbot of Zhaohua Temple was deeply disturbed. After some discussion, that very night they sent Master Wu Chen, Wu Huan, and Wu Nian to investigate. So far, none of them have returned. Compared to Shen Qingqiu's generation, the Wu generation were of higher seniority. Therefore, their cultivation shouldn't be worse than his. Shen Qingqiu said in a slightly surprised way, No one came back. Yue Qingyuan nodded solemnly and said, Huanhua Palace and Tianyi also sent more than 10 disciples. None of them returned either. 3 of the 4 great sects had all been dragged down into this mess. Shen Qingqiu suddenly realized why they had been summoned today. Sure enough, Yue Qingyuan said, Our friends sent a message to Changqiong Mountain sect asking for our help. We must certainly send help. This matter is urgent, and I fear that some others who like to stir up trouble might be behind this. Some of us have to go and some of us will stay behind. The others he was referring to, needless to say, referred to the demons. Liu Qingge was the first to speak. Bai Zhanping's sense of honor will not allow me to shirk this duty. I would like to escort Junior Marshal Brother Mu. Since the city was suffering from a plague, then the Lord of Qiancao Peak, Mu Qingfan, must be sent to help. Shen Qingqiu saw that of the 2 people who wanted to go, one was a person responsible for making his medicine, while the other was the one who assisted him in clearing his meridians of the poison. They didn't have the protagonist's halo, so anything could happen to them. This was way too worrying. What if they should meet with some misfortune? He said, I would like to go with them. Yue Qingyuan hesitated. I intended to ask you to stay behind to protect the sect. Shen Qingqiu still didn't know how to deal with him. All he could say was, Yue brother, why do you think I'm so fragile? Even though I am not so talented, if it really is the demons, I know a little about them that will be of help. A walking demon encyclopedia, whether it was the original Shen Qingqiu or him, both of them could definitely be given this title. For hundreds of years, Qingjing Peak had accumulated this knowledge. If its peak lord didn't read all those books, then he would be buried behind the back of the bamboo house. Yue Qingyuan considered this, and in the end, he let him go with Liu Qingge and Mu Qingfan, since it would be easy for them to. Also, the Lord of Baizhan Peak can protect them. It was decided that they would be divided into 3 groups. Liu, Mu, and Shen will go first to check out what was happening in the city. The second group would stay outside the city and make a move whenever they were needed. The third group would stay behind to protect the Changqiu Mountain sect. The situation was urgent, which meant that they couldn't spare the time to use boats, carriages, and other vehicles. Shen Qingqiu wasn't used to using just his flying sword to travel, and he was a little bit scared of heights too. But he knew that this time he must match his companion's speed. 3 people set off on their flying swords. After half a day, Shen Qingqiu, with his robes fluttering in the wind, looked down from the clouds and shouted to his fellow sect brothers, "Below us is the place where the Luo and Hen rivers meet." From high above, they looked at the 2 rivers that crossed each other. They looked like 2 silvery long and slender ribbons glittering in the sunlight, as if they were silver scales dancing chaotically. One of those was the river where Luo Binghe was found floating on an ice floe right after he was born. His surname was based on that river. The trio chose an open flat hill as a landing point. From there, they could see the upturned eaves of the houses in the Qinglan City, as well as its closed gates and bridges. Shen Qingqiu lowered the hand that he had been using to shade his eyes from the sunlight. "Why don't we fly straight into the city?" Mu Qingfan explained. Zhaohua Temple was asked by Qinglan City to create a giant formation in the sky. Flying swords or anything with spiritual power that flies over it will be forced to land. As Shen Qingqiu saw at the Immortal Sword Congress, Zhaohua Temple was very skilled at formations. If they were ranked in 2nd place regarding formations, then no one would dare to aim for 1st place. Shen Qingqiu asked no more questions. He thought that if this was not a normal plague, but something spread by someone with ulterior motives who wanted to create mischief, then that person must have openly walked into the city through one of its gates. Since that person couldn't fly or enter through a gate, then there must be another way inside. Just as he expected, Mu Qingfan, who had been given detailed instructions by Yue Qingyuan, led the other 2 people into a forest. In the shade of trees, there came the gurgling sound of water. The sound of water was coming from a subterranean cave. Mu Qingfan urged his 2 companions over, saying, "There is an underground river here that leads to the city." Shen Qingqiu understood what he was saying. "That weapons merchant escaped from here?" Mu Qingfan nodded. Some merchants who make covert business transactions use this place to meet or for transporting goods. Not many people know this place, but the weapons merchant was good friends with some of the Zhaohua Temple monks and confided the secret to them. The entrance of the cave was full of vines that were chest high. The 3 peak lords had to bend down to go in. After they had walked for a while, Shen Qingqiu's waist ached, but there was finally some space over his head. The gurgling sound of water had turned into the sound of rushing water. Beside the riverbed floated a few tattered solitary boats. Shen Qingqiu picked a boat that was a little bit better than the others. At least it didn't leak. With a flick of his fingertips, he lit the lamp that was hanging from the bow. As there was only 1 paddle, Shen Qingqiu gestured and said to Liu Qingge, "We will be moving against the current. The strongest of us will have to row us into the city. Junior brother, please." With a black face, Liu Qingge took the slender paddle and began rowing. With each stroke, the boat leaped forward a great distance. The lamp at the bow shook back and forth in confusion. Shen Qingqiu pulled Mu Qingfan to sit down comfortably. He looked at the water beside the boat and saw a few fishes happily swimming in the river. He said, "The water is clear." He had just finished saying this when he saw that there was something much bigger following the fish. It was a corpse drifting face down in the water.